Because think about it, right? You really have to put yourself in that exact room, breathing that exact air. I mean, imagine you were standing there in 1923 with The Wheel, and then 1925 with Strike. So let's say 1925.
Right.
You're standing in Moscow. There is no CGI. There is no modern tech. You're living in a world defined by widespread hunger, choking smog, rationing, and in a lot of places, just a total lack of reliable electricity.
It was grim.
Exactly, completely grim. And cinema, at this point, it's basically a circus tent. It's a novelty, a parlor trick you watch in a smoky room for a nickel. And yet, amidst all that absolute squalor, some madman decides he's going to film a riot using techniques that literally physically hijack your central nervous system.
Hold on a second. Hold on. That's a bit overhyped, isn't it?
What do you mean?
I mean, hijack your central nervous system. Let's calm down a bit. Are you joking?
I am completely serious.
What's fascinating here is that you're talking about what is arguably, sure, the most influential shot in the history of the medium, the absolute foundational grammar of modern visual storytelling.
Spot on.
And yet nobody today, literally nobody you'd pass on the street, has actually heard of it. So you have to ask yourself, and you listening right now have to ask yourself, is this some lost, unparalleled masterpiece? Or is it just a massive, pretentious fluke that film students pretend to like so they look clever at parties?
Oh, come on. It is absolutely not a fluke. I'll be completely honest with you. Going through these sources, this material kept me up at night.
Did it really?
Yes. It is properly genius. What we are talking about, and I promise you, if you stick with us here, understanding these early chaotic experiments involving tracking shots, the use of stark shadows, and the completely dizzying motion of things like a carousel or a steam engine.
Which we will get to, because it's mental.
It will completely change how you watch a modern blockbuster. You will never look at an action sequence the same way again. Next time you see a car chase, you are going to see the fingerprints of a 25-year-old Russian theater director.
Cinema, the magic vehicle, a comprehensive guide. Journey 1, 1913 to 1950.
I went in expecting complete rubbish, if I'm honest. And having reviewed the texts, I still find it incredibly dodgy in places.
Oh, you can't be serious.
I am. It is a chaotic, structurally baffling piece of work. It's a mess. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it does force you to look at the absolute bleeding infancy of an art form. We are talking about Sergei Eisenstein at the age of 25.
Just 25.
25 years old, working as a director at the Prolet Cult Theater in Moscow.
Right, he's 25. He's at this workers' theater, the Prolet Cult, and he's looking at the stage, and he just finds it completely physically constraining.
The narrow limits of the stage, as the sources call it.
Yes, the narrow limits. He hates the wood. He hates the proscenium arch. He wanted to burn the old artistic world down. He was looking at the aftermath of a massive revolution, and he thought, I can't put this energy into a 3-act play in a cramped room.
Right.
He wanted a means of expression that was powerful enough, versatile enough, to actually revolutionize art itself.
Wait. Let's not pretend he manifested this out of thin air. You're painting him as this lone cinematic messiah who walked out of the smog and invented film.
He practically did.
Rubbish. Before this massive project, his only cinematic output was a warm-up short. One single short film, the grotesque Kinednievnik Glumova in 1923.
Right, the Diary of Glumov.
Exactly. And it was basically just an insert for a stage play. And then from that tiny experiment, he just leaps straight into Strike, or Stachka in Russian, which is this massively ambitious, bloated portrayal of the struggle between capital and labor.
That's why it's an explosion of talent. What is so bloody brilliant about it is how he took the recycled building materials of the old world, the stagecraft, the existing theories of performance, and he used them to forge completely new narrative structures.
It's just recycled stage acting on film made.
It's the ultimate example of taking what you know and weaponizing it for a new medium. He didn't abandon his theatrical roots, he turbocharged them.
Are you joking? He didn't just take building materials, he straight up stole from his teacher. It's entirely derivative.
Oh, here we go.
If you read the source material, Vsevolod Meyerhold is the actual architect of this aesthetic. We're talking about a massively influential Russian theatrical producer and theoretician, born in 1874.
I'm not denying Meyerhold's influence.
Meyerhold wrote a book in 1913 called On Theater. And in that book, he advocated for a return to the traditions of commedia dell'arte. Eisenstein just lifted the whole concept and pointed a camera at it.
Hold on. You can't just throw out commedia dell'arte and dismiss Eisenstein's genius in the same breath. Meyerhold was brilliant, yes, but Eisenstein translated it for a brand new medium.
He copied the homework.
No, listen, the Commedia dell'arte, for those who don't know, was this Italian open-air improvised theater popular between the 1400s and 1700s. They used stock characters. You didn't have complex, brooding individuals. You had Harlequin, Pantaloon, Columbine.
You had the tricky servant, the greedy old man.
Exactly.
Stereotypes. Broad, flat stereotypes. And Meyerhold's entire acting technique was built on this. It was the complete antithesis of Stanislavski's system, which later evolved into Strasberg's method acting that Hollywood is so completely obsessed with today.
Right, and let's explain that, because the contrast is vital for why the film works. Think of Stanislavski like modern psychological therapy. If an actor wants to cry on stage, Stanislavski says they have to actually feel sad by digging into their own psyche, right?
Remembering a dead pet or a childhood trauma.
Yeah. And Meyerhold said that's absolute nonsense.
He treated the body like a machine. Biomechanics, that was his term. It was external, not internal.
Yes.
Meyerhold believed that if you slump your shoulders exactly 2 inches, drop your chin to a precise angle, and drag your left foot, the audience will perceive profound grief, even if you, the actor, are mentally writing a shopping list.
Which is spot on for what Eisenstein needed. Think about the physical limitations of early cinema.
Because there's no sound.
Exactly. You can't capture the internal whispered musings of a Stanislavski actor on a hand-cranked silent film camera from 50 feet away in a smoky, poorly lit factory. You need broad, machine-like movements. Eisenstein adapted Meyerhold's rigid physical theories to the screen because the screen demanded physical exaggeration to translate emotion without sound.
And we should soberly note here, just as a matter of historical record, how incredibly lethal the stakes of early Soviet art were.
Yeah, we have to mention that. It's a matter of absolute historical fact.
This wasn't just artistic squabbling in coffee shops. Meyerhold, despite his massive influence and his avant-garde brilliance, was later tortured and murdered on Stalin's orders during the Great Purge in 1940.
Right. And as impartial observers of this history, we just have to lay out the sheer brutality of the era. The state controlled the art, and if you fell out of favor, well, it was a death sentence.
We are talking about a regime that eventually executed its own most brilliant artistic architects if they didn't conform perfectly to state-mandated realism.
Yes, the historical backdrop here is incredibly grim, and we're going to get into the absolute blood-soaked hypocrisy of that era shortly. But staying with the artistic translation of Meyerhold's theories for a moment, because Eisenstein relied so heavily on these rigid physical postures, his film Strike does something absolutely mental.
Let me guess.
It fundamentally rejects the entire concept of a main character.
Which is exactly why I find it rather dull.
Rubbish.
You can't be serious, mate. Probing the individual psyche is the whole point of cinema. A film with no single hero. It's an absolute shambles.
It's not a shambles, it's revolutionary.
How are you supposed to care about what's happening on screen if there isn't a central protagonist to anchor your empathy?
That's rubbish, mate. Hear me out. You are looking at this through the most boring, predictable lens possible. Let's look at the actual structure of what he built. You've got the data on this. What are we actually looking at physically?
Physically, according to the records, Strike is literally 1,969 meters of film.
Almost 2 kilometers.
Do you know how heavy that is? Do you know the sheer manual labor of cutting nearly 2 kilometers of highly flammable celluloid by hand?
It's an industrial feat in itself.
It was produced by Boris Mikin, photographed primarily by Eduard Tiess, who was a genius in his own right, honestly, along with Fatov and Popov. Art direction by Vasily Rakals. And Eisenstein, in his derivative wisdom, structured this massive, sprawling epic into 6 acts of roughly similar length.
Which directly mirrors the Commedia dell'arte structure. It's a theatrical play transposed onto 2 kilometers of film.
Yes, but look at the cast. You have Ivan Klakvin, Grigory Alexandrov, Maxim Strok, who played an undercover police agent, literally just called Bulldog.
Brilliant casting.
They weren't playing people with backstories or inner lives. They were playing stereotypes. Informer, worker, mother, capitalist. It completely strips the film of its human soul. It turns it into a cold, academic exercise in socioeconomics. It's like reading a textbook on screen.
No. Creating a film with no main character back then is like trying to make a modern video game without a player avatar. It completely breaks the fundamental rule of how an audience interacts with the medium, but he did it intentionally.
He did it to be difficult.
You're looking at it through a modern Western lens where every single movie has to be a hero's journey. We are obsessed with the individual savior, But this was the avant-garde spirit of the 1920s.
Avant-garde is often just a polite word for unwatchable.
Let me finish. This aligned perfectly with futurism. Look at the poet Vladimir Mayakovsky.
The poet who ended up shooting himself.
Yes, he lived from 1893 to 1930, and he absolutely loathed romanticized poetry. He hated the idea of the brooding individual hero writing sonnets by candlelight. He loved modern technology. He loved factories, gears, electricity.
They loved the machine.
He embraced the Russian Revolution because the prevailing Marxist ideology of the time dictated that historical events, especially the crucial bloody events in Russia between 1902 and 1907 that this film is distilling, were decided by human masses. Not one guy with a gun, not a single handsome hero swinging in on a rope. The masses.
This raises an important question, though. If you eliminate the individual, you eliminate nuance. You're just moving chess pieces around a board to make a political point.
I disagree.
When you just have a character called Capitalist who smokes a fat cigar and laughs while people starve, and a character called Worker who looks nobly into the middle distance, you aren't making art. You're making a cartoon.
But think about what that means for you, the viewer, today. You go to the cinema, and modern movies always force a single protagonist down your throat to save the day. The greatest trick Hollywood ever pulled was convincing us that a single hero changes the world.
Well, it's better storytelling.
Isn't it bloody brilliant to actually try and film the rage of a collective crowd instead? To make the crowd itself the main character? To say, history isn't made by Batman, history is made by 10,000 furious factory workers.
In theory, perhaps. In execution, it leads to a complete stylistic mess, because here is the wall Eisenstein immediately slammed into. If you don't have a hero for the audience to root for, they get bored in 5 minutes. So how do you actually keep an audience awake for 1,969 meters of film?
You do it through a brutal plot and completely surreal, unhinged visuals. Here's where it gets really interesting. The film isn't about one specific historical strike. It's a distillation of that entire violent period from 1902 to 1907, leading up to the first failed Russian Revolution.
The dress rehearsal for 1917.
Exactly. And the plot kicks off with a devastatingly simple trigger. A worker in a Tsarist factory is falsely accused of theft. A micrometer goes missing. The management blames him. In absolute despair over his ruined reputation, his stolen honor, and the loss of his livelihood, he hangs himself.
Right, and his fellow workers, who are already completely discontented by terrible working conditions, discover the body and come out on strike.
Which leads to sporadic skirmishes with the police, which eventually escalates into open confrontation and a terrible, terrible slaughter.
But surrounded by that incredibly grim, grounded narrative, Eisenstein throws in visuals that are, frankly, absurd.
They're stylized.
You have conspirators meeting under factory roofs, which makes a bit of sense, but then they're meeting in empty swimming pools. Why an empty swimming pool? It's completely disjointed.
Because it's visually striking. It creates terrible, stark shadows.
Wait, it gets worse. You have social outcasts, these criminal characters dubbed the King and Queen of Thieves, who are recruited by the Tsarist police to act as provocateurs.
The lumpen proletariat.
Right. And where do they live? In a colony of empty barrels in a graveyard. And the cinematography literally frames them popping up out of these barrels, quoting the sources here, like beetles from under a disturbed stone. The camera lingers on this grotesque imagery.
That's an incredible visual metaphor.
It's giving me whiplash. 1 minute it's a documentary anthology of brutal police methods. The next it's intimate lyricism, then broad slapstick caricature of these thieves in barrels, then epic tragedy. It's entirely disjointed.
It's mental. But that ceaseless contrast of style is exactly what makes it brilliant. It's a passionate neophyte's enthusiasm. He doesn't know the rules of cinema yet, so he's trying everything all at once.
He's throwing spaghetti at the wall.
And despite the weirdness of the swimming pools and the barrels, it's the core conflict of guilt, lust, and power laid completely bare on screen. I mean, think about it. Put yourself in the shoes of those workers.
I'm trying.
A man is falsely accused, humiliated by management, and hangs himself in the very factory where he works. The mob mentality takes over. The rage becomes a physical contagion. Do you reckon you'd stay quiet if you were in those shoes? I'm not so sure I would.
Wait. You're trying to inject a moral dilemma into a film that goes out of its way to prevent you from doing exactly that.
How so?
The characters are named Worker and Capitalist. There's no nuanced, what would you do?
Yeah.
Because Eisenstein isn't asking you to think. He's telling you what to feel. He is demanding a specific emotional response.
Well, all art does that.
But the chaotic visuals, the stark shadows, the sudden cuts to grotesque thieves weren't just the random, passionate flailing of a 25-year-old. They were a highly calculated, quasi-scientific attempt to physically hack the audience's bodies.
Yes. The technical wizardry. This is where it gets spot on. Editing was the absolute essence of cinema to Eisenstein. He didn't care about the acting. He cared about the cut. He developed this concept called the montage of attractions.
Which is just a fancy academic way of saying he wanted to shock the audience by smashing two unrelated, spectacular images together.
But you have to explain how he did it. He escalated dramatic tension through visual collision. He has this apocalyptic, almost Goya-esque episode in the film where mounted soldiers are pursuing striking workers up through the many floors of a tenement building.
The horses on the stairs.
Horses on the stairs, whipping people on the balconies. It's pure visual adrenaline. And it builds on early experiments, like the 1923 film The Wheel by Abel Gance, where they used rapid-fire cuts, cutting faster and faster and faster, specifically designed to make the human heart mimic the rhythm of a steam engine.
Let's explain the actual mechanism there, because it's a biological trick, not magic.
Go on.
When you flash images at a certain frequency, say, reducing the length of a shot from 3 seconds to 1 second to half a second to just 3 frames of film, your optic nerve forces your brain to process visual information at an accelerated rate.
It overwhelms you.
Exactly. Your amygdala perceives this rapid visual change as a potential threat. It fires, dumping adrenaline into your system. Your heart rate naturally rises to match the visual tempo.
And that is properly genius. They weren't just editing a story. They were designing a biological, physical reaction in the audience, making your heart beat to the speed of a steam engine purely through the flickering of light on a screen. They reverse engineered the human panic response. That is cinematic magic.
I think genius is a strong word for what is essentially a cheap biological parlor trick. It's physiological manipulation.
It's filmmaking.
But let's talk about his other grand theory, the intellectual montage, or the montage of associations. This was his idea that you could create abstract ideas in the mind of the spectator by juxtaposing two completely separate, unrelated shots.
Right, the additive effect. Shot A plus shot B equals idea C in the mind of the viewer.
Exactly. And how does he execute this grand intellectual theory in Strike? He intercuts the horrific climax, the massacre of fleeing workers by the Tsarist police, with documentary footage of animals being slaughtered in an abattoir.
It's unforgettable.
A cow's throat being slit, blood pouring out. To convey the abstract concept of injustice and butchery, that's not intellectual, mate. That's the subtlety of a sledgehammer. It's like a cheap, heavy-handed propaganda poster.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back on that. You say it's heavy-handed, but you have to understand the audience he was playing to.
I understand them perfectly.
He was trying to reach a largely illiterate, agrarian, and working-class population. He couldn't rely on complex dialogue cards. He needed a visual metaphor that instantly conveyed the sheer, helpless brutality of the state against the worker. An abattoir does that perfectly.
Wait. If you think that's subtle, or if you think that's just him playing to an audience, you're completely ignoring the massive, glaring hypocrisy of the entire project.
I'm not ignoring it.
Here's where the whole thing falls to pieces for me, and where the propaganda element stops being an aesthetic debate and becomes a grim historical reality. The film ends with a final title card that aggressively exhorts the audience. Proletarians, remember.
Right, blaming the capitalists and the czar for the wounds inflicted on the workers, calling for eternal vigilance.
Yes. It is a direct command to the working class to remember the blood spilled under the czarist regime. But let's look at the historical reality of 1925, when this film was released. The young director, Eisenstein, was entirely under the spell of the Soviet system.
He was funded by them.
He was a state employee, essentially. And as a matter of historical fact, we must point out the horrific irony here, without taking any sides, just looking at the bleak historical ledger.
Impartially, yes.
In March 1919, just a few years before Eisenstein made this film crying out against the slaughter of striking workers, Leon Trotsky, the Bolshevik revolutionary who founded the massive Red Army, which by the way became the largest standing army in history, ordered the murder of several thousand Astrakhan workers.
Right, and we have to be absolutely impartial here about the history. Both sides of this political spectrum were steeped in unimaginable bloodshed.
Decimation.
The Tsarist police methods depicted in the film, the provocateurs, the brutal suppression, the massacres, were horrific historical realities. But similarly, the events of March 1919 are a historical reality. The Astrakhan workers were striking.
The very people the film is meant to champion.
They were striking in protest against the predatory Bolshevik exploitation of their factories, demanding better rations and pay, and Trotsky's Red Army brutally suppressed them. Thousands were executed, drowned in the Volga River, or shot.
Exactly. Thousands of them. Murdered by the very regime that is now funding and championing Eisenstein's film. The film screams about the sanctity of the striking worker and uses this sledgehammer metaphor of a slaughterhouse to condemn the Tsar, conveniently ignoring that the Soviet system producing the film did the exact same thing, arguably on a larger and more systematic scale, to thousands of workers just a few years prior in Astrakhan. It is an astonishing level of political cognitive dissonance.
I hear what you're saying. The political backdrop is soaked in blood and hypocrisy. There is no denying the historical facts of the Astrakhan massacre or the atrocities of the Tsarist regime.
It's a bloodbath on both sides.
But you've got to separate the art from the regime. Yes, the politics are deeply compromised, but the filmmaking techniques, the aggressive editing, the sheer ambition of trying to visualize abstract socioeconomic concepts, the biomechanics are still legendary.
Rubbish. You can't separate a propaganda film from its propaganda.
Of course you can't.
The entire purpose of the montage of attraction and the intellectual montage was to deliver a very specific, regime-approved message into the brains of the audience. He wasn't just making art for art's sake, he was building a psychological weapon for the state. When the message is fundamentally hypocritical, the art itself is compromised. It's rotting at the core.
But the techniques survived. The grammar of the editing survived long after the regime collapsed. Hitchcock used it. Spielberg uses it. Christopher Nolan uses it. Every time a modern director cuts rapidly between two parallel action sequences to build tension, they are using the grammar Eisenstein hammered out in 1925.
Even the director himself eventually sided with the skeptics.
Now you're just cherry-picking quotes.
Let's look at the source text for this entire debate. Cinema, The Magic Vehicle, Journey 1, 1913-1950. Later in his life, Sergei Eisenstein literally disowned strike.
He didn't completely disown it.
He looked back at this chaotic sledgehammer subtlety film and called it, and I quote from the text, a case of the infantile malady of leftism.
He was being overly critical of his early work, like any great artist. They all do that.
He wasn't just being humble, he was recognizing its fatal flaws. Even the director knew it was an infantile malady. He admitted that in this film, and even in his later, more famous film, October, he was merely a director of fragments, not a coherent whole.
Fragments can be brilliant.
He could make a stunning 2-minute montage, but he couldn't weave it into a cohesive narrative with a human soul. The book says it. The director says it. Why are you defending it?
Because the creator isn't always the best judge of their own work. Artists evolve, they look back at their raw, youthful energy, and they cringe. They want to be seen as mature and polished.
Oh, they just realized it was a shambles.
No, that raw energy is exactly what changed the world. The same book you're quoting also explicitly states that even if you consider it just an apprentice piece, Strike is without doubt one of the greatest directorial debuts in cinema history.
Apprentice piece. Key word.
To a modern eye, the raw fragmentation, the whiplash of styles from intimate tragedy to slapstick barrel dwellers is exactly what makes it brilliant. You've missed the point entirely. You're looking for a smooth, polished, 3-act Hollywood narrative, and this is a punk rock explosion of a medium figuring out what it can do.
It's a disjointed, heavy-handed piece of dodgy propaganda that even its creator couldn't stand to look at later in life.
Right.
It's fragments, nothing more.
And I reckon that's the beauty of it. So look, to everyone listening, if our lazy pub argument version of this history is enough for you, cheers. But if you've actually got the spine to face the grit, the political hypocrisy, the intense mechanical theory, and the full bloody history of how your favorite movies were actually born, buy the book. Read Cinema, The Magic Vehicle for yourself.
They should, yes.
Do you dare?
Yeah.
Look at the facts. Look at the 1969 liters of film. Look at Meyerhold's biomechanics. And decide for yourself if it's an unparalleled masterpiece or an infantile malady.
I think you'll find the text supports my view of the fragments far more than your romanticized, highly caffeinated view of his genius.
We're not going to agree on this, but I want to leave you, the listener, with this final unsettling thought. Think about this next time you're sitting in a cinema, in the dark, watching a massive action sequence.
Oh, here we go.
The hero is running. The bomb is ticking. Look at the stark shadows. Feel the rapid cuts. The shots are getting shorter. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, half a second. Your heart rate is rising. Your palms are sweating. Your breathing is getting shallow. Are you feeling that naturally? Or did a 25-year-old Russian theater director, frustrated by the narrow limits of a wooden stage, figure out how to hijack your central nervous system 100 years ago?
Or maybe you just had too much coffee. Cheers!